He paid millions to erase his past, but his black ex-wife returned with the child he denied. Hi, my beautiful Alcott Stories family. Yet before this story begins, I want you to take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear might just break your heart before it heals it. Imagine a man who paid millions to erase the woman who once saved him, only to wake up one morning, face to face with the child he denied. And the black ex-wife, who never stopped loving him even when the peas dot aan enden, when the dantas fizzes, world turned its back on her. This isn't just a story. It's a mirror of pain, redemption, betrayal, and truth. It's for every woman who's been silenced, for every child who just wanted to be seen, and for every heart that still believes in second chances. But before we dive in, I want to say something personal. Recently, YouTube has been pushing my channel down in reach. It's heartbreaking after all the nights I've stayed up pouring my soul into these stories, but your support means everything. If my stories have ever made you cry, smile, or feel seen, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with your family, and please watch till the very end, because sometimes the end is where the healing begins. Now, let's begin. The media frenzy outside the Whitmore Grand Conference Hall was blinding. Journalists lining the barricades, drones hovering overhead, fans holding up banners with Chase Whitmore's initials, and influencers live streaming every second of his company's biggest launch yet. The Thalatha Withelathun-year-old tech tycoon walked through the glass doors like royalty, flanked by security, his face calm, sharp-jawed, eyes cool behind sleek sunglasses. But inside, his mind was wired tighter than any AI code he'd written. His sweater, tailored charcoal gray, layered over a crisp white shirt, hugged his frame like armor, and beside him walked Elena Monroe, his fiancée, radiant in a silk gown, her arm curled around his with the grace of a seasoned socialite. They were the it couple of the business world, wealthy, white and golden. The press loved them, and Chase, who had spent years curating this perfect image, leaned into the performance like a man afraid to blink too long in case the truth leaked through his silence. Inside, 1,000 seats were filled with investors, celebrities, and journalists. Massive screens displayed the new Whitmore AI brand in vibrant motion, and as the lights dimmed, Chase took the stage to thunderous applause. "Today we don't just imagine the future," he began, voice steady. "We build it." His speech hit all the right notes: innovation, legacy, humanity, and Elena beamed from the front row like a queen watching her empire rise. But beneath Chase's words was a heartbeat he tried hard to ignore. One name, one woman, one past. Nyla. Her name echoed in the back of his mind like a memory buried under years of silence and shame. He had once loved her with a fire that refused to die, a love that didn't care about skin tone or social class, until his father, cold and brutal, forced him to make a choice, her or the empire. Chase chose the empire, not because he didn't love her, but because fear disguised itself as logic and power dressed as obligation. He walked away from Nyla. He never saw the pregnancy test, never read the letters she mailed, never heard her voice again. All his father had to say was, "She's not good for your brand," and like a coward, he obeyed. Money poured in. His tech exploded. Awards followed, and soon Elena did too. She fit the mold: perfect, educated, elegant, and spotless. Chase convinced himself he had moved on, until today. The crowd erupted into cheers as Chase unveiled their new AI learning program for underprivileged communities, showcasing sleek tablets and digital tutors for kids across the city. "For the future generation," he said. Children from a partnered non-profit were brought on stage to receive the first tablets. A dozen little face-smiling, shy, curious lined up to shake Chase's hand. He knelt down for photos, posing with one arm around a boy who clutched his tablet like treasure. But then his gaze shifted and stopped. At the edge of the group, standing quietly in a red hoodie and jeans, was a boy no older than 5. His curls were thick and honey brown, his skin a smooth bronze butt. It was the eyes that shattered Chase's breath. Icy blue, familiar, piercing. His own eyes, staring back at him from a face he'd never seen before. The boy wasn't smiling. He wasn't clapping. He was just watching Chase with a kind of knowing stillness, like he recognized him, like he had waited his entire life for this moment. Chase blinked, his smile faltering. He looked again. The boy still stood there, hands tight around a crumpled drawing. A volunteer called out, "Zeke, come on, sweetheart." The boy turned and ran off stage, into the arms of a woman just out of frame. Chase felt the blood drain from his face. Zeke. The name scraped across his heart like gravel. Elena touched his shoulder gently. "Babe, you all right?" Chase nodded stiffly. "Just tired." But inside, his chest was thunder. He scanned the room, but the woman and child had vanished into the crowd. Later, backstage, the press clamored for sound bites, but Chase barely heard them. He pulled out his phone and rewound the live stream. Pause, zoom, there, that face, that boy, those eyes. He watched it again and again. The blue in those eyes wasn't coincidence. It was lineage, blood, DNA. Something buried had surfaced and it had a name. Zeke. Chase whispered it like a ghost prayer. Could it be? Was it even possible? The math lined up. The features lined up. The guilt had never left. And if Zeke was real, if he was his, then what the hell had Chase done? Outside, confetti rained as people celebrated the birth of a new empire. But inside Chase's mind, an old story was clawing its way out of the grave, and this time, it wouldn't be buried. He had spent millions building a future, burying a past. But one look, one child, one impossible stare, and the cost of erasure had finally come due. Before the empire, before the tailored suits and the boardroom applause, there was just Chase and Nailatu's souls that collided like fire and oxygen in a world that tried to suffocate them from the start. It was never about money then. It was stolen kisses on Harlem rooftops, late-night diner runs, and whispered dreams beneath threadbare sheets. She was a journalism student with a laugh that made him forget the weight of his family name. He was just Chase, then not Whitmore Industries, not the golden boy heir, just a man in love with a woman whose melanin-rich skin and razor-sharp mind made him feel alive in ways no corporate victory ever could. They met at a college panel. He was the keynote guest. She asked the only question that challenged him. That night, they walked in the rain for hours. No umbrellas, just hands intertwined, already rewriting each other's stories. Chase never imagined falling in love with someone his father would consider unacceptable. But love doesn't ask permission, it just blooms, even in hostile soil. For a while, they built their own world, one where color didn't define value, and their future looked like wedding vows whispered under candlelight. But the walls of privilege began to close in fast. When Vincent Whitmore found out about Nyla, his fury was volcanic. He didn't scream, issued threats wrapped in icy precision. "If you marry her, the trust dissolves. The board will cut you out. Everything you've worked for will vanish," he warned, voice dripping venom. Chase, torn between love and legacy, begged for time, but time, as it always does, ran out. Nyla got pregnant. It wasn't planned, but when she told him, her hands trembled with both fear and wonder. "We made life," she whispered, tears clinging to her lashes. She expected a smile, a hug, something tender, but Chase went silent. Not angry, not cruel, just vacant. That night he promised he'd fix things, said he just needed a little time. But the next morning he was gone. No text, no call, no closure. Just gone. Nyla's calls were left unanswered. Her emails bounced back. She wrote letters handwritten, heartfelt, hopeful. Every week she mailed him updates, show the baby kicked, how she chose the name Zeke because it meant strength, how much she missed him. Weeks turned to months. Then silence turned to ache. What Nyla didn't know was that every letter she sent was intercepted by Vincent's private office, opened, read, then burned. He's moved on. Vincent had told her once, appearing at her apartment uninvited. Don't embarrass yourself further. There will be no place for you or your child in his future. Nyla slammed the door in his face that day, but the fear he planted rooted deep. Pregnant and abandoned, she dropped out of school, took 2 jobs, and moved to the outskirts of the city, where no one knew her as the girl who once loved a Whitmore. She gave birth alone, gripping a nurse's hand, while Zeke entered the world with a quiet cry and eyes too blue to be denied. She stared into those eyes and whispered, "Your father may have erased us, baby, but I will never let you feel unwanted." Zeke grew fast, smart, kind, always asking questions. Nyla struggled to answer. "Where's my dad? Does he know me? Am I invisible to him?" She told him his father was working far away, building something important, and one day maybe he'd come back. She lied, yes, but only to protect his little heart. Meanwhile, Chase buried himself in work. He told himself she didn't want the child, that maybe she moved on, that silence meant peace. He never questioned why it hurt to imagine her happy without him. In truth, he was too afraid to ask, too cowardly to dig. So he distracted himself with rising stocks, gala nights, and a new kind of lovin' built more on appearance than depth. Elena was safe, elegant, approved. She asked no difficult questions and never challenged his silence. But every now and then, when the house was too quiet, he'd wonder what if he had stayed? What if he had chosen love over legacy? What if there had been a child? Nyla, meanwhile, kept every letter she wrote but never mailed. She didn't want to beg. She didn't want to break. She just wanted him to be the man she believed he once was. Mrs. Dana Rowe, her godmother, often said, "Truth buried under power always finds a way to rise." Nyla never thought it would happen until that charity event, until that moment, until Zeke locked eyes with a man he'd never met and instinctively recognized. That night, Nyla pulled out the letters, the ones Vincent had claimed would be ignored. She read them again, each word a wound, each sentence a reminder of how hard she tried. And then she did something she swore she never would again. She circled a date in red ink on her wall calendar and wrote beneath it one word, truth, because the time for silence was over. And if Chase Whitmore wouldn't come to terms with his past, then she would drag it into his present, letter by letter, truth by truth, sun by sun. Morning poured softly into the penthouse through tall, crystal-clear windows, casting warm streaks of light across tangled silk sheets and bare skin. Chase stirred first, blinking against the sunlight as the city came to life beneath him. But it was the soft weight of Elena's head on his shoulder and her arm draped across his chest that held him still. For a brief, stolen moment, it all felt almost peaceful. Elena giggled sleepily, curling against him like a satisfied promise. "You always disappear before sunrise. Not today, huh?" Chase offered a tired smirk, brushing hair from her face, trying to quiet the rising tide in his gut, the one that whispered that peace built on broken pieces never lasts. "Maybe I'm learning to stay," he murmured, though he couldn't tell if it was for her benefit or his own. They sat up, laughing about some inside joke, sipping coffee she had brought to bed, the scene staged like a perfect advertisement. 2 beautiful people, a high-rise sunrise, luxury and love. But fate has a cruel sense of timing, and truth doesn't knock when it comes to collected crashes. The bedroom door burst open so violently the hinges groaned, and time seemed to fracture into shards. There stood Nyla. Her braided hair was pulled into a sharp bun, her brown skin glowing with fury and dignity. And beside her, clutching her jeans and peeking out with frightened blue, stood Zeke, the boy from the charity, the boy from the dreams, the boy who shared Chase's DNA. "Tell him who you are, Chase," Nyla said, her voice low and shaking but unwavering. Her words cut the room like glass, and suddenly the warmth drained from the morning. Chase froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Zeke looked between them, confused and terrified. "Mom," he whispered. Elena sat up, pulling the sheets over her bare chest, her eyes wide and wild. "Who the hell are you? How did you get in here?" Nyla didn't answer her. She took one step into the room and locked eyes with Chase. "You were supposed to be his father. Instead, you became a stranger with a penthouse and a microphone." Zeke clung tighter to her, his bottom lip trembling. Chase moved toward them, one step, hands trembling. "Zeke!" But the boy flinched and hid behind his mother's leg. Elena's voice grew louder, panicked. "Security!" she screamed. "Get out, you're insane." And that's when it happened. Nyla turned sharply toward her, and with the strength of every broken promise, every erased letter, every lonely night holding a child with no answers, slapped Elena across the face. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. Elena gasped, grabbing her cheek in shock. "You're a woman," Nyla said, tears hot in her eyes, voice breaking as pain spilled from every syllable. "And you still helped break another." Her voice was not just anger, it was betrayal wrapped in dignity. "You knew about me, you knew there was someone, and you still smiled next to him like my pain was a trophy." Elena stammered. "Iti didn't know about the kid." Nyla's stare was fire. "But you knew about me, and that should have been enough." Chase stepped between them, his voice finally rising, desperate, broken. "Enough, Nyla, please. Not like this." She turned her fury on him. "Not like this? Like what, Chase? Like silence? Like ghosting a pregnant woman? Like leaving your son to wonder why he wasn't enough for you to stay?" Zeke was crying now, quietly. Nyla scooped him up into her arms, holding him like a shield and a prayer. "He doesn't need your empire. He needs the man I thought you were." Chase was trembling now. Everything he built, every image he protected, every lie he dressed in gold, unraveling before him. He looked at Zeke, whose tear-streaked face looked too much like his own for denial. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear to you, Nyla, I never knew." She laughed bitterly, eyes wet but cold. "You didn't want to know." Elena stood now, still stunned, still wrapped in the bedsheet like shame. "This is insane. You can't just barge into our home." Nyla looked around the room at the expensive sheets, the sparkling glasses, the scent of last night's lies still thick in the air. "This isn't a home," she said. "This is a stage." Then she looked back at Chase. "I loved you. I begged you in letters you never read, in silence you never broke." She held Zeke tighter. "But now, I don't want your love. I want your truth." With that, she turned to leave, her son in her arms, her dignity blazing behind her like a comet through glass. Chase stood there, frozen, while Elena sobbed in the corner, still holding her face. The heat of that slap seared into her skin like a brand. And outside, the sun kept rising unbothered, unstoppable, casting long shadows across the ruins of a perfectly crafted lie. The echo of the slamming door hadn't yet faded, but Chase stood motionless in the silence it left behind, as if time itself had stopped breathing. The walls of his penthouse, once symbols of control, now felt like tombstones to everything he had tried to bury. Elena sat curled in the corner, still cradling her cheek, her pride shattered. But Chase didn't look at her, he couldn't. His eyes remained locked on the empty space where Nyla had stood, where Zeke had clung to her side with wide, wounded eyes. Eyes that mirrored his own. Chase stumbled back into the bedroom, gripping the edge of the dresser as if his balance depended on it. He stared into the mirror, but all he saw was a man who had spent years pretending he'd done nothing wrong, a man who had rewritten his own history so well, he forgot there were others still bleeding from it. He didn't need a DNA test. That boy, his chin, his mouth, the sharp silence in his sterate, was like looking into a smaller, more innocent version of himself, the version that hadn't been crushed by fear, power, and his father's voice. Hours passed like lifetimes. When Chase finally showed up at Nyla's doorstep, the sun had dipped behind the skyline, and all that remained was the pale blue shadow of regret. Nyla answered the door with tired eyes, her braids now loose over her shoulders, Zeke asleep in her arms. She didn't say a word, just turned and walked inside, trusting him to follow not because he deserved it, but because she was too tired to keep running. He sat on the edge of her couch, staring at a torn superhero backpack on the floor, a drawing on the fridge that said Zeke plus Mommy in crayon, and a pair of small shoes neatly lined by the door. This wasn't a home built with wealth, it was built with survival. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally, his voice hoarse. Nyla set Zeke gently in bed, kissed his forehead, then returned with folded arms, her spine straight, her pain barely concealed. "I did," she said. "I told you in letters. I called. I emailed. And when all of that was met with silence, I wrote letters again. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Every doctor's visit, every little milestone. I wrote you everything." Chase blinked. "I never got them." Her lips quivered with anger. "That's because your father made sure you didn't." She walked to a drawer and opened it, pulling out a worn shoebox. Inside were envelopes, some still sealed, some marked "Return to sender," some stained with tears. She placed it in front of him. "These were supposed to be yours." Chase opened one and began to read. He kicked for the first time today. "I cried because I knew he'd look like you." Another. "They said it's a boy. I wanted to name him after you, but I couldn't. Not after how you left." Another. "He asked today why he doesn't have a dad. I lied. I told him you were helping people far away." Each word hit harder than the last. Chase covered his mouth with one hand, eyes burning. I thought you disappeared. I thought you didn't want me around." Nyla laughed, bitter and breathless. "No, Chase. You disappeared. You let your father erase me like I was nothing. You let fear speak louder than love." He slammed the box shut, standing. "So this is about revenge, then? You brought him to my home just to shame me, in front of Elena?" Her eyes snapped. "Revenge? I raised our son by myself. I worked 2 jobs, missed meals, skipped sleep, and gave him love every single day without your name. I didn't show up for revenge. I showed up because he deserves to know who he is. Because I'm tired of pretending that your absence is some tragic accident. You made a choice to walk away, and now you don't get to rewrite it." Chase staggered backward like she'd slapped him. The truth landed heavier than any public scandal. "I didn't know, Nyla, I swear." His voice cracked, and I hate myself for it. Her expression softened just slightly, but her guard stayed up. "You don't get to hate yourself more than I had to heal myself," she whispered. "This isn't just about you feeling sorry. This is about you deciding who you want to be now, not for me, for him." Chase looked toward the hallway, where Zeke's bedroom door was cracked open, where the soft glow of a nightlight spilled out like a beacon. "Does he know?" Nyla shook her head. "Not everything, not yet. I told him you were a good man once." Her voice broke. "Please, don't make me a liar." And in that moment, Chase didn't see an ex. He saw a mother who had carried a mountain on her back without breaking. He saw a child sleeping in a room he didn't help decorate. He saw the pieces of a life that should have been his to share, but now was his to earn. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked. Nyla stared at him for a long beat, then nodded once. "Come early. He likes to show off his comic books after breakfast." Chase smiled weakly. "I'd like that." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "This isn't forgiveness, Chase. It's a start. If you want a place in his life, you better come with more than guilt." Chase nodded. "I'll come with truth." And as he stepped into the night, heart torn open, empire suddenly irrelevant, Chase knew. The boy he denied was the only legacy that mattered now. The next morning began with a silence that felt heavier than words, the kind of silence that settles in a child's heart before they even know how to name it. Nyla stood at the kitchen stove, flipping pancakes, her face wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Zeke sat at the small table, his crayon hovering over a paper he had barely touched. His feet swung restlessly under the chair, and his little brow was furrowed in thought. "Mom," he said softly, not looking up, "why doesn't my daddy want me?" The question came so quietly, it almost didn't reach her ears, but when it did, Her entire body paused. The spatula trembled in her grip, and the smell of burning batter filled the air as she froze, heart sinking into her stomach. She turned off the stove and mumbled, "I'll be right back," then walked quickly to the bathroom. She closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to the tile floor as tears finally burst from her eyes. She tried to stay quiet, didn't want him to hear the broken sobs, but her hand couldn't muffle the pain fast enough. Her baby, her Zeke, had asked the one question she had dreaded for 6 years. She had worked so hard to shield him from the weight of rejection, painted stories of heroes and faraway missions, told him bedtime tales of a father who was brave and busy, not absent and afraid. But children are smart. They hear what's not said. They feel absence the way adults feel betrayal. And now the wound had surfaced. Outside the bathroom door, Zeke sat silently, hugging his knees, listening. That afternoon, Chase arrived as promised. He wore casual clothes, this Timino suit, no watch that screamed wealth, just jeans, and a hoodie, trying to look like a man rather than a brand. He took Zeke to the park nearby, hoping the open space and sunshine might soften the distance. They sat on a bench beside a duck pond, the wind lifting Zeke's curls and ruffling Chase's thoughts. "You ever feed ducks?" Chase asked, handing him a small paper bag of crumbs. Zeke shrugged. "With Mommy." Chase smiled gently. "Want to try with me?" Zeke didn't answer. He stared at the ducks, then looked up at Chase with eyes too old for 6. "Are you rich?" Chase blinked. "I guess so." "I don't want a rich dad," Zeke muttered. "I want a brave one." The words shattered Chase like glass underfoot. "Zeke, I didn't know about you. If I had—" "You left," Zeke interrupted. "Mom said you didn't know, but you still left. You didn't look." His voice cracked, and he threw the crumbs hard at the water, spooking the birds. "Real dads don't forget their kids." Chase sat in stunned silence. Every defense crumbled. He wanted to say it wasn't that simple, that grown-up choices sometimes get messy, that fear and pressure from powerful fathers can silence even strong men. But none of that mattered to a child. All Zeke saw was a man who hadn't been there to hold his hand when he was scared, or clap when he tied his first shoes, or wipe his tears when he fell off his bike. "You're right," Chase said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't brave, but I want to be now. For you." Zeke stood up and walked ahead, not running, just slowly widening the space between them. Chase didn't follow. He sat there with his head bowed, watching the water ripple, wondering how a man with everything could feel this hollow. That night, Chase returned to his cold penthouse. The same walls, the same silence. Only now, it screamed. He dropped his keys on the counter and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. His fingers twitched for his phone, for the dozens of unread messages from Elena, from his PR team, from the media asking for quotes on the charity scandal, but none of them mattered. The only headline in his mind was 6 words long. "My daddy's not rich. He's brave." Chase walked to his office, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old photography he had almost thrown away years ago. It was of him and Nyla at the beach. Her belly was round, her smile wide, and his hand was resting on her stomach like he already knew something sacred lived inside. He stared at it for a long time, then finally allowed the tears to fall. Not the quiet ones of guilt, but the heavy, body-shaking sobs of a man grieving the version of himself he had once hoped to become. The photo slipped from his fingers and landed face up on the floor, as if daring him to pick it back up, to remember, to rebuild. That night, Chase didn't sleep. He sat beside the window, watching city lights blink like distant promises. And for the first time in his adult life, he whispered a prayer, not for money, not for success, but for the courage to become the kind of father his son could someday look at and say, "That's him. That's my dad." The sun had barely risen when Elena stormed into Chase's penthouse, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the chandelier above the spiral staircase. Her heels clicked with fury across the marble floors as she found him standing by the window, still in the same hoodie and jeans from the day before, unshaven, lost in the skyline. She didn't wait for a greeting. "So it's true," she spat, her voice trembling with rage and humiliation. "You have a child, with her, and you didn't even tell me." Chase didn't turn. His fingers were gripping the railing so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "I didn't know," he murmured. "Don't give me that," she snapped. "You had years to figure that out. Years to wonder if the woman you vanished from was carrying more than heartbreak. But instead, you built this perfect image of yourself. Now it's all falling apart and I'm the one left standing in the fire." She tossed a glossy magazine across the counter. On the cover, bold letters screamed, "Millionaire's Secret Black Family, the hidden son of AI mogul Chase Devereaux." Below it, a picture of Nyla outside her apartment, holding Zeke's hand, both looking startled. The photo was taken without consent, zoomed from the bushes, and now the world knew. "Is this what I signed up for?" Elena asked, her voice cracking now. "Being the accessory to a man who lies for a living?" Chase finally turned around. His face looked different, older, heavier, not from age but from truth. "I never lied to you," he said quietly. "I lied to myself." She scoffed. "Don't get poetic with me, Chase. You let me build a future on a version of you that wasn't even real. While you were out trying to win over that woman and her child, I was here, defending you, loving you, thinking we were planning our wedding." Chase's eyes dropped to the floor. "Zeke is my son," he said, as if the words alone could ground him. "And Nyla, she's not just someone I used to love. She's someone I should have fought for. I didn't. And now I see the price." Elena crossed her arms, staring at him like a stranger. "So what? You want us all to live happily ever after now? You, your ex, your son, and me, like some modern fairy tale?" Chase didn't respond. His silence was a loud confession. She stepped closer, tears now threatening her carefully done mascara. "You owe me the truth right now, Chase. No more hesitation, no more middle ground. It's me or them." The words hung in the air like smoke from a burning bridge. And still, Chase didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence wasn't indecision, it was revelation. His heart had already drifted away, not because Elena wasn't beautiful, not because she wasn't enough, but because she wasn't Nyla. She wasn't the woman who wrote letters that were never read. She wasn't the one who held his child through every sleepless night. She wasn't part of the life he now realized he'd abandoned for comfort. Elena stared at him, blinking hard. "You don't choose me," she whispered, half in disbelief. "After everything I've done for you?" Chase's jaw clenched. "I never deserved either of you," he said honestly. "But Zeke didn't ask to be hidden, and Nyla didn't ask to raise him alone. If I have a chance to do even one thing right in this mess, it's being there now." Elena turned, grabbing her bag, her breath ragged. "I loved you, Chase," she said at the door, "but loving a man who's still haunted by another woman is a slow death. And I'm not dying for you." She walked out without another word, her heels echoing like gunshots in the hallway. Alone again, Chase sat on the edge of the couch, picked up the tabloid, and stared at Zeke's tiny face, printed in ink for the world to dissect. His son, dragged into headlines and hashtags because of his cowardice. He flipped the page, another photo of Nyla at the courthouse steps, her hand shielding Zeke's face. The caption read, "Mystery woman raising mogul's child, sources say she's been silenced for years." Chase's stomach twisted. This wasn't just gossip, it was a storm. And he had made it. His PR team was already flooding his phone with strategies, statements, legal threats. But none of that mattered now, not compared to the reality of a little boy who thought his father didn't want him, not compared to a mother who had once trusted him with her entire future and ended up betrayed. The headlines might fade, the money might bounce back, but trust had to be rebuilt, brick by brick, from the rubble. Chase stood, walked to the window again, and pulled out his phone. No press releases, no lawyers, just a message to Nyla. "I want to talk. No excuses, no running, just truth." He hit send. Then, slowly, He picked up the photograph from the night before, the one of her pregnant on the beach, smiling. He placed it beside the magazine, one image of private love, one of public scandal. And in between them, he finally saw the man he had become, and the one he still hoped to be. The morning after the tabloid storm, Nyla stood outside the daycare center where she worked, gripping her ID badge like a lifeline, until the director appeared with a folded expression and offered her a painful smile. "We're so sorry, Nyla," she said quietly. "Parents are concerned. The board thinks it's best we pause things for now." It wasn't a termination. It wasn't an accusation. It was worse. It was erasure dressed as sympathy. Nyla walked out with her head high, but once she reached the alley behind the building, her knees buckled. She sat against the brick wall, clutching her handbag to her chest, tears falling silently as memories of Zeke's laughter inside that center played in her mind. They didn't fire her because she was unfit. They fired her because her life didn't fit their comfort. She was now that woman from the headlines. The homewrecker, the secret, the mistake. That afternoon, Chase arrived at her doorstep, holding an envelope full of cash and a nervous hope in his eyes. "You didn't deserve what happened," he said gently. "Let me help. I can make this go away. I'll talk to the board. I'll pay whatever." Nyla stepped back, her expression flaring like lightning through storm clouds. "You erased me once, Chase," she said, her voice hard and low. "You don't get to buy me back." She pushed the envelope back into his hands like it was poison. "You think money fixes this? I'm not your PR crisis." Her words sliced through the air, sharp and unshakable. Chase's mouth opened to speak, but he knew better. Knew that no currency on earth could undo the dignity that had been ripped from her when he walked away years ago and again, when the world decided to frame her story without her voice. That night, Nyla sat at her kitchen table with Zeke drawing spaceships beside her. She opened her laptop and stared at the empty page on her screen. The blinking cursor felt like a dare. Her phone buzzed with alerts. More headlines, cruel comments, her name dragged through digital mud. She inhaled deeply and began typing, not to defend herself but to define herself. Her voice came alive through every word, every memory, every silent scream she'd swallowed for 6 years. She wrote about loving a man who chose silence over strength, about raising a black son in a world that tried to erase his roots, about being painted as a villain in someone else's fairy tale, about surviving when the narrative was stolen. She wasn't writing a letter this time. She was writing her truth. A few nights later, she visited Mrs. Punchable. Roher, retired college professor, who once called her the girl with wildfire in her soul. They sat in the garden, where the old woman sipped tea beneath string lights, her voice still velvet and wisdom-laced. "You can't just survive this, Nyla," she said. "You have to rise through it. Let them see you, the real you, not as the headline, as the hero." Nyla looked down at her hands, calloused from years of invisible labor mothering, mending, managing pain in silence. "What if I'm too tired to rise?" Mrs. Rose smiled. "Then speak. That's how we rise, baby, with words that are louder than their lies." Days passed. Nyla published her essay on a local blog, under the title, "They Called Me a Secret, But I Was Always Whole." The post spread like wildfire. Women, black, brown, single mothers, erased lovers reposted it with tears and applause. Finally, one comment read, "A woman who didn't let shame write her story." Another, "They tried to bury her, but she bloomed." Radio shows picked it up. Podcasts invited her. Her inbox filled not with pity but with admiration. She was no longer a rumor. She was a voice. One evening, Chase found himself watching a live stream of her speaking at a women's panel downtown. She stood in a simple white dress, braids cascading over her shoulders, confidence blooming in every word. "The media tried to define me by who I loved," she said. "But I am not someone's scandal. I am someone's mother. I am my own name, and I will not disappear." The crowd erupted. Chase didn't clap. He sat still, humbled. For the first time, he didn't see her as the woman he lost. He saw her as the woman he never deserved. Nyla walked off stage and kissed Zeke's forehead, where he waited backstage, beaming up at her. "You're famous now," he whispered. She knelt beside him, touching his face. "No, baby, I'm seen." That night, she posted a photo of the two of them under the caption, "I may have lost jobs, but I found my voice, and he found his mother's strength." Chase saw it. He didn't like it. He didn't comment. He saved it. Because some moments weren't meant to be touched, they were meant to remind. Nyla's story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, it belonged entirely to her. Chase sat alone in his office that night, the skyline glowing behind him like a city mocking him for all the light he'd surrounded himself with, while his soul dimmed in silence. On his mahogany desk sat a crisp white envelope, the results of a DNA test he'd ordered in secret, unable to face truth until it came printed in black and white. He stared at the seal for what felt like hours, as if opening it might also tear apart the last sliver of denial he'd clung to. His fingers finally moved, slicing through the paper slowly, trembling not from fear of being a father, but from knowing he already was. Inside, the bold numbers glared up at him like a ghost come home. Probability of paternity, Tisa'a wa Tisa'un filmia. That period at the end felt like a final sentence on the story he tried to bury. Chase didn't cry. Not immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, letting the paper fall onto his lap, his hands limp at his sides like a puppet with its strings cut. The weight wasn't just in the result, it was in the memory of a woman who had loved him before the headlines, before the investors, before the tailored suits and the gala smiles. A woman who held his hand in the dark when he couldn't afford light. A woman who saw him not his potential, not his future, but his broken present, and still stayed. And he left her. For a name. For his father's approval. For the illusion of success. The DNA didn't shock him, it confirmed the ache in his chest he had been carrying since the moment Zeke looked him in the eyes and said, "My dad is brave." A knock interrupted the quiet. His assistant Theo peaked in mid-30s, loyal, always polished, but never nosy. "You needed me, sir?" Chase nodded slowly, gesturing to the seat across from him. Theo sat, unsure of what storm he'd just stepped into. Chase didn't speak right away. He picked up the test results, held them in both hands like a fragile truth, and then whispered, "It's mine. He's mine." Theo blinked. "The boy?" Chase nodded. "Zeke, my son." He exhaled sharply, the kind of breath that hurts your ribs. "And Nyla, I left her. Before I knew, before I had a reason. But even without Zeke, I shouldn't have walked away." Theo, who had never seen Chase this human, leaned forward slightly. "What will you do?" Chase laughed under his breath, a short, joyless sound. "I don't know." He looked out the window again, the lights of the city now blurry. "I gave up the only woman who loved me when I had nothing, for a world that loves me for everything I'm not." The confession hung in the room like incense, bitter and lingering. "I wear this tailored armor," he continued, tugging at his designer collar, "but I'm still that scared boy my father told not to love a woman who made him uncomfortable." Theo said nothing. He knew some silences were sacred. "I ghosted her," Chase added, voice cracking now. "No call. No fight, just silence. And she kept the baby, raised him, gave him love and dignity. While I built this company thinking I was climbing, turns out I was falling the whole time." He stood, walked toward the framed photos, lining his office shelf, press conferences, awards, feature covers, all images of Chase, the icon. Not the man, not the father. Not the one Nyla once kissed under street lamps when they were broke, but fearless. "I used to think being a father would slow me down," he muttered. "Now I realize, not being one broke me in ways I never saw." He paused on one photo cover of Forbes, captioned, "Chase Devereaux, the man of the future." He lifted the frame and placed it face down on the shelf. Theo finally spoke, gently. "You still have time to be the man he deserves. And maybe, if you're lucky, The man she can forgive. Chase turned, eyes red but sharp now. Forgiveness isn't owed. I know that. But truth is. So I'm done hiding. No more lawyers. No more PR filters. He held up the test results and folded them carefully. She deserves to hear it from me. Not from a courtroom. Not from the media. From the man who failed her face to face. Theo nodded. What about the backlash? The board? Investors? Chase smirked bitterly. They didn't love me. They loved the illusion of me. And illusions don't raise sons. He grabbed his coat, not waiting for further questions. As he walked out, the receptionist looked up nervously. She had seen the headlines, heard the rumors, but tonight, Chase didn't lower his head. He looked her in the eyes, nodded, and kept moving. Outside, the wind cut through the night like truth through silence. He walked to his car, placed the DNA results on the passenger seat like a passenger he should have carried years ago, and whispered to himself, "This time, I don't run." As the engine started, a single tear fell not from shame, but from awakening. The kind that only comes when a man stops trying to protect his image and starts fighting to reclaim his soul. Elena returned not with regret, but with venom wrapped in red lipstick and designer perfume, stepping into Chase's office uninvited like a storm refusing to check the forecast. She slammed a glossy magazine down on his desk. Headline screamed, "Chase Devereaux confirms secret child." Her jaw was set, eyes ablaze. "So it's true," she hissed. "You were playing house with your hidden black family while I was picking venues for a wedding that never meant a damn thing to you." Chase didn't flinch. He had expected this. "Elena," he said evenly, "stop making this about race. This is about truth, about lies I told to survive, a world that punished me for loving who I loved." Her laugh was cold, brittle. "Don't you dare spin this into poetry, Chase. You embarrassed me. You humiliated yourself. And her, she's nothing but a storyline you ran from, and now want to rewrite like it makes you noble." Before he could reply, the elevator dinged and Nyla stepped out, unaware of the volcano she was walking into. Her braids framed her face like armor, and her son's hand gripped hers tightly. Chase moved to intercept, but Elena had already turned, eyes narrowing at Nyla like a predator sizing up the kill. "So you're her," she sneered, stepping closer. "The martyr, the poor, wronged black woman with the soulful eyes and sad story." Nyla's face didn't move, but her grip on Zeke's hand tightened. "You don't get to mock my skin while pretending it's not your insecurity that's bleeding through your teeth," she said calmly. Elena scoffed. "Oh, please. You think you're some queen now. You were a secret, a mistake he buried. Until your little charity essay made the rounds, and suddenly everyone wants to hand you a crown." Chase stepped forward. "Elena, stop." But Nyla lifted a hand. "Let her speak. Let her vomit out every drop of poison so there's nothing left for her to infect." Zeke looked up, confused, but Nyla kept her tone steady. "You want to shame me in public? Do it. But understand every word you say says more about you than me. And I won't shrink for your comfort." The receptionist stood frozen. Two interns whispered nervously. The tension in the room was thick enough to slice, but Nyla remained unmoved. Elena turned to Chase, disgusted. "You think you're saving her? You're not. You're just running back to a past you were too weak to fight for." Chase's voice, when it came, was soft but heavy. "No," he said, looking Elena in the eyes. "We were never a future. We were just a bandage. I never healed." Elena's expression cracked. "Excuse me? You were the woman I chose to silence the guilt," he said. "You were safety, applause, an escape hatch. But I was never whole with you." Her eyes flared with a mix of fury and heartbreak. "So that's it? That's truth," Chase replied. "And I won't keep lying to anyone, including myself." Elena turned to Nyla, her tone cold and sharp. "You better enjoy this moment, because he'll fail you again." Nyla didn't blink. "If he does, I'll still rise, because I never needed him to stand tall. But he needs to learn how to live in truth or he'll always collapse under the weight of his performance." Elena grabbed her purse, paused, then slapped Chase across the face, not out of love, but out of loss she didn't know how to swallow. "I hope she's worth the silence," she snapped and stormed out. The doors hissed shut behind her like a final exhale. Chase stood still, cheek red but expression calm. Nyla looked at him, unreadable. Zeke tugged her hand, whispering, "Mommy, why did that lady yell so much?" She knelt down and kissed his forehead, because sometimes grown-ups are loud when their hearts are broken. Chase dropped to one knee beside them. "Zeke, I'd like to talk to you and your mom. Not as a businessman, not as someone in the headlines, but as a man who finally sees what he lost." Zeke tilted his head. "Are you going to cry again?" Chase smiled gently. "Maybe." Nyla gave a faint, tired nod. "Then let's talk somewhere quieter." "Not here." Chase stood, opened the private elevator, and held the door. They stepped in together, not as a couple, not yet, but as three people tangled in pain, truth, and unfinished love. As the doors closed, Chase whispered, "Thank you for standing your ground. I needed to see that." Nyla looked straight ahead, then stopped just watching. Start choosing better. The ride down was silent, but it was the first time in years Chase felt like he was descending into something real, not just rising in status. He had lost his engagement, but maybe, just maybe, he was finding his soul. The afternoon was quiet, the kind of hush that settles after a storm, when nothing is certain but everything feels possible. Chase didn't speak much as he drove. Nyla sat beside him, arms folded, unsure if this ride was a second chance or just another ending waiting to unravel. Zeke, in the back seat, pressed his face against the window, humming softly, unaware that he was the living thread stitching two broken adults together. They pulled up to a corner cafe, its ivy-covered brick still clinging to time like an old friend. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped inside, and for a heartbeat, Nyla froze because the smell of roasted beans and vanilla hadn't changed, nor had the creaky floorboard near the counter where Chase used to trip over nerves just to ask for her number. She smiled faintly. Chase noticed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You remember?" She nodded. "Table by the window. You spilled cappuccino on my sketch pad and offered to buy me a gallery." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was terrified you'd walk out before I could say anything right." They sat, the same table still worn at the edges. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was reflective, gentle. Zeke climbed into the booth, pulling out crayons and a folded sheet of paper. "I'm gonna draw us," he said proudly. Nyla and Chase exchanged a glance, a soft crack forming in years of guarded pain. "You were always drawing?" Chase said quietly. "Every time I came to your place, your fingers had charcoal smudges. And you'd tell me it made me look like an artist," Nyla replied, eyes distant, "even when I felt like a mess." Their voices wove together like old fabric, threadbare, but familiar. The waiter approached. "Haven't seen you two in forever," he said cheerfully. Nyla stiffened. Chase offered a polite smile. "We're catching up." They ordered the same drinks they had years ago, mocha for her, black coffee for him. When the cups arrived, Nyla cupped hers like a memory too warm to hold for long. "I used to dream we'd raise a kid who loved art and code," she whispered. "And now look at him." Zeke held up his drawing, beaming. "See, that's me and Mommy and you under the sun." He had drawn 3 stick figures, holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun with a smiling face. Chase blinked back emotion. "You gave him my eyes," he said. Nyla's voice softened. "He took them. I didn't have a say." A pause. Then she added, "But I'm glad he did." Chase reached out, not touching her hand, just resting his fingers near hers, unsure if he was allowed to bridge that space. "I was scared," he admitted. "When I left, when I stayed gone, I told myself it was to protect you. But truth is, I was protecting my image. Not you, not him, not love." Nyla didn't look away. "I begged you in letters you never got. I thought maybe if I showed up you'd remember who we were. But the door always stayed closed." Chase leaned in, eyes glistening. "My father intercepted every letter. I know that now, and it kills me." Zeke, now sipping his juice, added, "Are we going to come here again? I like it here. It's happy." Nyla blinked fast. "Maybe, baby." Chase looked at her with new weight. "If you let me, I'd like to come here again. With you, with him, with no lies, no hiding." The sunlight poured through the window like a blessing, casting golden rays over the table. Nyla traced the rim of her cup. "I don't know if I trust you, but I want to. And that's something." Chase nodded. "Then I'll earn it. With time, with truth, with presence." Zeke held up another drawing, this one just starting this time. The sun had arms, hugging the little family from above. "I think the sun is happy we're together," he said with a giggle. Nyla smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Chase reached into his coat and pulled out a tiny frame. "I kept this," he said, placing an old photo on the table, the first photo they ever took together in that same cafe years ago. Both of them laughing, mid-blink, messy, beautiful. "I never stopped looking at this," he said, "even when I pretended I forgot." Nyla's eyes welled. "Then why didn't you come back sooner?" "Because shame is a wall you build brick by brick," Chase said. "And I couldn't see over it until I saw him." He looked at Zeke, whose drawing now had hearts floating around the sun. The cafe buzzed quietly around them couples, sipping coffee, waiters laughing, life moving forward. But for the three of them, time stood still in that booth. Forgiveness didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in slowly, tucked in memories, sketches, shared glances. Chase reached over and gently touched the back of Nyla's hand. This time, she didn't move away. And under the smiling sun in Zeke's drawing, something unspoken bloomed maybe, not yet a new beginning, but the soft, trembling hope of one. The next morning felt gentler, like the sky itself had softened its tone just for them. Chase had barely slept, but not because of restlessness, because for the first time in years, his soul felt quieter, no longer at war with itself. He stood at his window, staring at Zeke's drawing now pinned to his fridge. The stick-figure sun still grinning, and for once it didn't feel childish, it felt like prophecy. But peace rarely lingers uninterrupted. A knock came, too hard to be casual. When Chase opened the door, Vincent Whitmore stood like a shadow resurrected, immaculate suit, cold stare, and the kind of posture that said, "I still own you." Chase didn't speak, but stepped aside, not out of fear, out of readiness. Vincent didn't sit. He stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, eyes scanning the place as if dusting off the parts of his empire that had become tainted. "You've embarrassed this family," Vincent began, his voice like winter wind calm, cutting, unapologetic. "The board is whispering. Our name is trending for all the wrong reasons. You're sleeping with a woman who once threatened everything we built, and now you parade your illegitimate child like a trophy." Chase didn't flinch. "His name is Zeke. And the only thing illegitimate is how I let your silence become my compass." Vincent's lips thinned. "I gave you order, power. You were nothing before my name carried you." Chase stepped forward. "No, I was someone before I traded my voice for your approval. You didn't raise me, you programmed me." Vincent scoffed. "You're delusional if you think this love story of yours will survive the weight of consequence. You have two options, Chase. Fix this and things with that girl. Issue a public correction, take Elena back, and salvage your standing, or walk away and lose everything." Chase exhaled slowly, as if releasing every ghost that had lived in his ribs. "I already lost what mattered once. I won't do it again." Vincent took a step closer, the heat between father and son now undeniable. "You think she'll protect you when the lawsuits come? When the shareholders flee, when the vultures smell weakness?" Chase didn't blink. "I don't need protection. I need peace, and she gives me that. Zeke gives me that. You never did." Vincent's expression cracked for just a moment. The tiniest flicker of something wounded pride, buried hurt, maybe even regret, but it vanished like mist. "You are not the man I raised," he spat. "Exactly," Chase replied, voice steady. "And thank God for that." Silence stretched long between them, heavy as lead. Then Vincent straightened his tie. "Don't call me when it all crumbles." Chase opened the door, holding it wide. "Don't worry. I won't." Vincent walked out, his silence louder than any threat. The door clicked shut, like a final verdict. Chase leaned against it, breathing deep, shoulders finally dropping not in defeat, but release. Moments later, Nyla entered from the guest room with Zeke in her arms, eyes cautious. "Was that him?" Chase nodded. "And it's done." Nyla searched his face for the cracked panic, doubt, regret, but found none. Just a man stripped of illusion, standing bare in truth. "You okay?" she asked softly. Chase stepped closer, brushing a kiss to Zeke's forehead. "For the first time, yeah." Zeke wrapped his arms around Chase's neck. "You smell like pancakes," he giggled. Chase laughed. "Guess we better make some then." Nyla watched them, her heart a hurricane of caution and curiosity. This wasn't a perfect man, but maybe, just maybe, it was a man finally willing to be real. And for her, that was a miracle all its own. That evening, the house fell quiet after laughter, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache, but listens. Zeke was fast asleep on the couch, wrapped in a superhero blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling like a heartbeat on display. Nyla stood at the window, arms crossed, staring out at the garden Chase had never used, before now scattered with Zeke's paper planes and chalk-drawn suns. Chase stood a few steps behind her, hands in his pockets, nerves prickling like static beneath his skin. "Do you remember," he said gently, "when we were 19 and I burned the spaghetti so bad the fire alarm thought it was a 5-alarm emergency?" Nyla didn't laugh, but her lips twitched. "You poured orange juice on the stove thinking it would help." Chase chuckled softly. "You still stayed." "I loved you then," she replied. "I didn't know love could be ripped away with silence." He stepped beside her, not too close, not too far. "I never gave you what you deserved, Nyla. Not then, not even now." Her gaze stayed fixed on the night. "And what exactly do you think I deserved?" Chase swallowed, his voice heavy. "To be heard, to be chosen, to be protected, to be fought for when it got hard." Her arms dropped to her side slowly. "You left me bleeding, Chase, pregnant, alone. I wasn't a footnote, I was your whole story, and you cut me out like I was a mistake." He blinked hard. "I thought I was doing what would keep us safe, what would keep my name from getting dragged through the mud. But I was just scared of losing power, respect, my father's approval, and I lost you instead." Nyla finally turned to face him. Her eyes weren't angry anymore, they were tired, deep, knowing. "I screamed into pillows so Zeke wouldn't hear me cry. I worked 3 jobs to afford his inhaler. I prayed you'd show up even, if just at the door, but you disappeared. You let your silence speak louder than my tears." Chase stepped closer. "I know I can't erase that. I can't rewrite what I ran from, but I can write the rest with you, or even just for him. I'm not asking for romance, Nyla. I'm asking for forgiveness, even if I have to earn it one honest day at a time." She shook her head slowly. "You broke more than a heart, you broke trust, and love doesn't grow in places that don't feel safe." His voice cracked. "Then let me make it safe. Let me show you that I'm not the man who walked away, that I've finally become the father our son deserves and the man you once believed in." Nyla looked at the sleeping child curled on the couch, then back at the man whose world had once revolved around ambition, now revolving around a little boy's laugh. "Words are easy," she whispered. "So don't give me promises. Give me presence. Show up. Stay when it's uncomfortable. Say the hard truths. And if you do all that, maybe I'll believe again." Chase's shoulders slumped in fragile relief, like a man offered water after crawling through sand. "I will. I swear, I will." Nyla reached up and gently touched his cheek, not with affection, but with recognition. "Then start by putting him to bed." Chase nodded, crossing the room, scooping Zeke gently into his arms. The boy stirred but didn't wake, head falling against his father's shoulder with a sleepy sigh. Chase tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." When he turned around, Nyla was leaning against the doorway, arms crossed again but softer this time. He believes in superheroes, she said. Be one. Chase gave a quiet, broken smile. For both of you, I will. And for the first time, Nyla didn't shut the door behind him. The next morning, the sky stretched soft and gold, as if the universe itself had paused to honor a decision that had yet to be made. Nyla sat alone on the porch, wrapped in her robe, a steaming mug in her hands, and her eyes fixed on the distant city skyline once, a symbol of everything she'd lost, now quietly asking if she was ready to start again. Inside, Chase moved quietly through the kitchen, packing Zeke's lunch for school with an ease that didn't beg for praise, but proved he was trying. No cameras, no assistants, just a man remembering how to father through action, not apology. Zeke bounced out of the bathroom, giggling, a superhero cape flying behind him, and Chase knelt to tie his shoes, letting the boy speak endlessly about saving the world with invisible powers. Nyla watched through the screen door, her heart both tender and terrified, knowing love wasn't a fairy tale, but a decision made daily, in moments like this, quiet, unrehearsed, real. When they stepped outside, Zeke kissed her cheek, then tugged Chase's hand. "Let's go, Daddy. Don't be late." Chase paused. "Can I walk him to class?" Nyla nodded slowly. He'd like that. After they left, the silence felt heavy, but not lonely, like space being made for something new. Hours passed. She cleaned, thought, stared at old journals, reread a letter she never sent, and before the sun could fully set, a knock tapped gently at the door. Chase stood there, not with flowers, not with gifts, but with a framed photo. Zeke's drawing, laminated and trimmed, now centered in a wooden border. "I want this to hang wherever you are," he said, "because that's where I want to be, too." Nyla took it, eyes glassy. "You've changed, Chase. But it's not just about you proving you're different. It's about me knowing I'm safe to choose what's right for me." Chase didn't push. "Then I'll wait. I'll build that safety one day at a time." She glanced down at the picture, 3 figures, under a smiling sun, holding hands, and something in her chest shifted. Later that night, they sat on the couch, with Zeke between them, watching cartoons, their hands brushing once, twice, until Nyla finally laced her fingers through his. No fireworks, no dramatic music, just forgiveness folding itself into the space between them. Days turned to weeks. Chase never missed school drop-off. He helped with homework, learned to braid Zeke's hair like she once did, and never once asked for credit. He showed up in rain, in traffic, in moments that once would have scared him away. One Sunday morning, they visited a park they'd once dreamed of taking. Zeke to Nyla held the boy's hand, and Chase trailed behind until Zeke turned and grabbed them both, pulling them forward together. "Race you to the tree," he shouted, running ahead. And as they chased him, something unspoken raced too, the past, trying to catch them. But this time, it couldn't. That evening, Nyla sat beside Chase, beneath that same blooming tree. "He asked me if we were a real family now," she said softly. "What did you tell him?" Chase asked, eyes searching hers. Nyla turned, full of strength, grace, and quiet fire. "I told him we're trying." He exhaled. "Do you still believe in trying with me?" She reached for his hand. "I believe in second chances. I believe in Zeke, and I believe you finally believe in me." Chase's eyes welled. "Then I'll never let go again." As Zeke ran toward them with arms wide open, they stood together, and when he collided into them, they wrapped him in the kind of embrace that made even the sky weep. In the final scene, inside Nyla's cozy living room, a new photo hangs on the wall. Zeke, between his mom and dad, all 3 smiling under a blooming tree, the same sun from his drawing now, real and golden outside the window. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs.